All right. Hello, everybody on Facebook as well. And hello to all of you. I'm Bex Stern Rosenblatt. You know me by now, but just in case you've forgotten me in the past week, I teach for the Conservative Yeshiva at the Fuchsburg Jerusalem Center, and I teach mostly Tanakh, but I also teach Midrash. And this is our last class together in this series. So if you've fallen as in love with me as I've fallen in love with all of you, and you want to keep learning with me, then come learn with me. I teach a weekly Parshat HaShavua class that y'all are welcome to join. And I do a ton of other teaching for rabbinical schools and for synagogues and for Hillels. If your synagogue or any of those kind of things want to bring me in to teach for a scholar in residence weekend or for a class, let's chat. I'll put my email in the chat again. That's not my email. That's the source sheet. I'll put my email in the chat just in case you don't have it. I am sometimes slow to respond to email, but Stuart's laughing. Please do be in touch. All right. And the other thing is, if you're hiding, if you're on video, if your video is not on and you are hiding, don't hide. Unless you are currently driving or in the shower, I would love to see your face. Because I'm not really going to lecture at you very much at all. We're going to make meaning together. So let's get started. For the past 3 weeks, we've been reading Lamentations, and we've been reading the Midrash on Lamentations, leading up to Tisha B'Av, leading up to the day on which we commemorate the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, both times, and all this other bad stuff that has happened in Jewish history. And we commemorate it by reading the Book of Lamentations, by reading other laments, and it's this day of collective mourning. Now, that happened last week, and we're past it. So you may be wondering what we're doing here, hanging out with the Book of Lamentations and hanging out with the Midrash on the Book of Lamentations. And the answer is we are jumping into the cycle of Jewish time, that the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah are this incredible, very distinctive time where we need to get from a place of destruction, this feeling of abandonment, this feeling that we've done wrong, but God's done wrong, this feeling of like complete and total annihilation. And also this idea of us all together, this idea of the collective us. 7 weeks from now, we'll get to Rosh Hashanah, and it'll be this time of like rejoicing, this time of crowning God as king, this time of opening ourselves to the ideas of repentance, all of this stuff, which is fairly foreign to the us that we were on Tisha B'Av. So question is, how do we do that? One answer is you take, I don't remember her name, Sylvia? You take Marcia's class with the Advanced Learning Institute, looking at the seven haftalot of consolation, which are this built-in way where we every time we read the Haftalah, we are building up the relationship with God again. Another way you do it is by reading the Midrash that we're going to read today that situates Tisha B'Av in relationship to Passover. So I'm not going to give anything else away. We're going to spend the first long time, the first big chunk of this class, thinking about Tisha B'Av's relationship to Passover, and then we're going to use that to get back to Rosh Hashanah. So trust me on this one, okay? So let me share the source sheet in the chat with you all. And as y'all know, if you have something to say, if you want to read, you are raising your actual hands or your Zoom hands, and I'll call on you, and you will say your 2 sentences, you will make your brilliant point, and then you will get out. If you have a dissertation to share it with me by email or put it in the chat. This is my class, not your class, for giving dissertations, and I don't like lecturing at you anyway. Tov. So we're going to start with a very, very, very brief lecture for me on the structure of Lamentations Raba, because you do need to understand it a little bit. We're going to be reading what's called a Petichta, where the Petichta has a rabbi of the Midrashic period opening with a quote, and then taking us through a series of logical jumps to conclude with the very first verse of Lamentations. The first verse of Lamentations is Eicha Raba. How does the city sit alone? Alas, how does the city sit alone? And so the game that a Petichta is playing is, how do we get from this first verse that we open with to the idea of how does the city sit alone? How does the logic game we're playing change your understanding of the first verse of Lamentations? Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the verse, which is going to be used as the opening verse of the Petichta. This is in Lamentations 3. Lamentations 3 is a angry and unhappy section that we'll be reading. Would somebody, Marcia's not here. Do we have any chanters or people who are inspired chanters? Anybody want to chant this for us in the Hebrew? I don't know if that's in any of your wheelhouses. Any chanters hiding there? No? Oh, well. You all do not want to hear me chant ever. I will burn your ears off. Okay. In that case, would somebody read Lamentations 3 verses 13 to 18 in the English? Yeah, go for it, Sandra. Oh, make sure you unmute. Bear with. Sandra, are you still there?
Okay, I'm off mute now. Let me see. Let me get the chant. Let me get it back. Okay, thank you. All my nation, their song all the day. 5, he has sated me with bitterness. He has intoxicated me with wormwood. 16, he has crushed my teeth with gravel. He has pressed me down in ashes. 17, he has rejected my spirit from being in peace. I have forgotten goodness. And 18, I have said my perpetuity has perished and my hope from Yeshem.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandra. All right. So these are an intense set of verses. Is there anything that stands out here? Anything that strikes you? What's surprising here? What's interesting here? Who is the he that's being spoken of? Yeah, Nikki.
All right, God.
Great. Okay. Yeah, God's done all this horrible stuff to us. Yafeh. And it's really, really bad stuff. Does anything stand out? Are there any images here that like stick in your head that seem surprising, that seem weird? What's the force of these verses? What do these call to mind? Anybody? This is normal. This is how I talk to God, you know. God's always putting gravel in my teeth. Sylvia.
5 minutes thing there. I thought it was pretty interesting that they said he has sated me with bitterness and he has intoxicated me with wormwood. You get drunk off wormwood? I don't know what that actually means, except I guess it means that there was a lot of it crushed down my
I think
throat.
wormwood comes from actually, because
Absinthe.
comes from fruit trees.
It's absinthe, I believe, in fact. Absinthe, so you could get pretty drunk. Which is a hallucinogenic. It's not just you get drunk, it's a hallucinogenic absinthe.
And it also can be poisonous if you have enough.
Yeah.
It's also extraordinarily bitter. Yafeh. Okay, but the intoxication and the satiation are like the worth remarking on. They're interesting words here. Yafeh. Stuart.
The way I'm hearing it, this is much stronger than a lament or even a complaint. This is an indictment. This is like accusing God, of criminal negligence, in violating or rejecting the covenant. It's like looking at the exile. It's like, when there's a sign saying "Abandon hope, all ye who enter."
Yeah, right. He's my perpetuity has perished, and my hope from God. Great, Nikki.
I was, I guess, gonna say basically the progression here, or the devolution, it ends up the last two verses of this passage that you've set up. Like it starts with physical suffering, right? Like I've got arrows in my kidneys, the sons of his quiver. And then the second line was surprising to me. Everybody else is laughing at me. I'm an object of derision. That was surprising to me, but okay. And then, but by the end, I'm tormented completely. And then I have no generations after me. So it's the complete annulment of all contracts with God.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So that we're going through and things are getting worse and worse throughout. It's like the progression of this verse is things that get worse and worse and worse. Yafeh. Okay. Nikki, just say another word about why they're becoming their laughing stock becoming their song was surprising to you.
Because of the importance that imputes to this figure who is speaking.
Okay.
And also that we're now into individual derision. And it's laughing stock to my nation as if it's a king, a priest, a leader, or my people, okay, or my house, all right.
Me, Yafeh. Okay, great. So we're gonna follow two of these words. We're gonna follow sated and bitterness, which both appear in verse 15, which y'all were pointing out, like it's Sylvia, you're pointing out, to become sated with bitterness and intoxicated with wormwood is odd. So sated appears that the Hebrew word there is Savah. It appears over and over again in the Tanakh. And it's a word we struggle with. The idea of being sated is a blessing and a curse. Let's read Deuteronomy. We're going to read Deuteronomy 8 and then Deuteronomy 31, both on the idea of being sated. I'll read it in the English for the sake of time. Deuteronomy 8. When you have eaten and become sated, then you shall bless God, your God, on account of the good land which he has given to you. Take care lest you forget God, your God, and not keep his commandments, his rules, and his laws, which I am commanding you this day. Lest you eat and become sated and build good houses to dwell in, and your flocks and sheep have multiplied, and your silver and gold have multiplied, and all that you have has multiplied, and your heart grows haughty, and you forget God your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. All right, that's Deuteronomy 8. We find this word sated, savah, also in Deuteronomy 31. This is Moses speaking God's words. When I have brought them to the land which I swore to their ancestors, a land flowing with milk and honey, and they eat, and they become sated, and they grow fat, then they will turn to other gods and serve them and despise me and break my covenant. Okay, so sated appears in a couple other places in the Tanakh, usually in a similar context. What is the context here? What sort of association do you have with the idea of being sated from these texts? What does it mean to be sated? Is being sated a good thing, a bad thing? Where does being sated come from? Talk to me. Yeah, Megan.
I think sated is an okay thing if you've had enough, but when you just take too much, and as it says, and you forget, when you go beyond the limits, and you forget where it comes from, you grow fat and you go complacent and forget God, and you go to other gods, which are your food or your wormwood or whatever is sating you. Then you break my covenant, or you break, my is not capitalized there, so you break the covenant.
Yeah,
the covenant. When you are going outside the boundaries of, I think sated just means, oh, I feel good, I had a good meal. But then if you chase that meal and forget God, it's goes downhill.
Okay, keep adding to that, Rosalie, and then Stuart.
Rose, I just had a feeling of gluttony when I see that word both times. That's it.
Okay.
In the negative, it's just overdone to be gluttonous.
Interesting. Okay, so like to be sated seems to, like, you would think it meant, like Megan said, to have enough, and yet, and that should be a good thing, we would think, and yet there's clearly something dangerous here. And Rosalie, thank you. Rosalie is saying, like, yeah, well, maybe these bad connotations are to be gluttonous, to desire more than you need. Okay, right. Stuart.
No, I second the gluttony motion. It has a negative connotation in this context. It's like you're receiving and you're no longer giving.
Huh. Interesting. Stuart, I have to ask, your two last comments, you've seconded a motion and talked about criminal negligence. Are you a lawyer in real life?
Thank God, no. I'm a retired physician.
Okay. Okay. Nikki.
I was going to save everyone from this comment, but I decided not to. I apologize. So it seems to me that sated means to have enough. Okay, like you've had enough to eat, you're satisfied, which is from the same root in English. But the danger of that is that you're not turning to God or thinking about God anymore because you're not in trouble. You don't feel like you need anything. So therefore, you're vulnerable to be seduced into other pleasures because you don't need help as far as you're concerned.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, okay, so we've got two slightly different interpretations of the danger of satiation. One is Rosalie's, where you're satiated, you have enough, and yet you're still gluttonous, you're still looking for more. And two, Nikki's, the danger of being satiated is that you're no longer in a state of dependence. You're no longer need to keep turning back to God. Okay. Sylvia and then Rochelle.
Which may be why we are asked to do benching after eating, because when you finish eating, you want to get up and, have the whatever and have a good time and everything's okay. Forgetting who God is and how we got there and how you got that food. And I think that is a good way to look at that for me.
You fit. Awesome. Yeah. And I mean, that's literally Deuteronomy 8, verse 10, right? V'achalta v'savachta u'varachta et Hashem Elohecha. Right. That's, I mean, totally something that I grew up with my family doing, is like, you eat the meal and everyone's done. And then you carry the food back to the kitchen and sort of graze for the next hour and keep eating. Rochelle.
Seems like the only good place to be is needy. Once you're past needy, you're in a very dangerous place.
Great. Yeah. So doubling down on Nikki's comment there, right? It's like, it is good. Like, the danger of being satiated is that you are no longer needy. And that the way we have a relationship with God is when we're in this state of need. Okay. Okay. Yafei. So we're going to take that. Yes. Yeah, Rochelle, go on.
I just want to say I'm not happy with that.
Yeah, it's odd. It is very odd. And it's interesting that despite that, God gives us the land, right? That God gives us the land in which we are able to be satiated. Like, God knows we're gonna mess up and still allows us to become satiated. Okay. Can you take that back for me, either the Rosalie interpretation or the Nikki interpretation, into what it means in Lamentations 3, verse 15? He has sated me with bitterness. Excuse me? Bitterness? What are we talking about? He has sated me with bitterness. The rest of the times we're talking about satiation, it shows up in that context we've just established. What on earth does it mean he's sated me with bitterness? Yeah, Sylvia, start us off.
Maybe this comes into the point where we've had enough bitterness. Because at some point, he starts saying, well, this actually might be our fault. So maybe this is starting to be that little turning point. Because sated, when you think of sated as you have enough, or with Rosalie's interpretation, when you've had enough and too much, there you go. Maybe he's had enough and too much of bitterness, and we're going to start getting sometime into I forget when it is, but I know we get into it, of looking at, really, I'm bitter because I did something wrong.
Okay. Interesting. Keep going, keep pushing it. Other thoughts? Sated with bitterness. It's a very weird phrase. Yeah, Nikki.
I hope I can say this fast enough. It is taking the same, it's taking the form of praise he has sated me with and wrenching it completely around to I am filled with bitterness. I've had my, he's given, you're here. Now you've had enough. But in this case, it's bitterness, and it wrenches our expectations so that we pay attention.
Okay, yeah, so it's playing with the form and it's shocking. Okay, cool. Luz, and then Sandra, if that was a hand.
Hi, when you first read the lamentation, it reminded me of getting a diagnosis of cancer.
Wow.
It's attacking your organs. You're being isolated from people, kind of not a laughing stock, but you're isolated from people because you're so sick and people don't know how to react to you. And then the bitterness is, to me, like your radiation, your chemo, is actually giving you something poisonous to get rid of the cancer so that you would get better. So that's how I saw the bitterness. And also bitterness, you were talking about being satisfied, not so much that you have to be in need of God, but also too that you should be grateful. You don't have to be suffering to appreciate God. And I think that's what he's looking for, the gratitude part.
Oh, wow. Really, really cool. Okay. That, like, he sated me, like, I've had enough of everything that from God. Like, it's not just the good that comes from God, it's also the bad, and the bad can be turned into good, perhaps.
But the juxtaposition of the two words is very odd. Sated and becoming bitter from being sated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's incredibly odd. I mean, it demands interpretation, right? It demands making sense of. And Luz, I love the way you were just making sense of that. That's incredibly cool. Sandra, were you raising a hand earlier? No? Okay. Okay. He sated me with bitterness. I've had enough of bitterness, or bitterness is actually something that maybe is good for me. Or he sated me with bitterness because everything comes from God and I've had enough good and enough bad from God. Or he sated me with bitterness because, like, no matter what he's giving to me, I'm going to start rebelling and complaining. So now, like, let's give him something to talk about. Like, he's given me the bad, so I'm going to complain just the same way as when he gives me the good, I complain. Other thoughts, other possibilities? He's sated me with bitterness. Rosalie's like pointed out, this is absolutely bizarre. This is a striking phrase. Other thoughts about why sated me with bitterness? Megan. And then Benny.
Just quickly, it's a turnaround. The sated, he gives us so much that we turn gluttonous. So it's our fault. Here, God is doing it. He's just saturated us with, giving us too much bitterness. So it's like, it's a twist.
Interesting.
We both do it, God and us.
Yeah. So where does our bad behavior come from? Is it our innate nature despite God's gifts? Or is it that, like, God's put a bunch of poison in us and now it's leaching out? Voila. Okay. Benny and then Sylvia.
Well, I think it's also a way of Jeremiah. This is now Eicha. He's complaining. I mean, we have deserted God. Jerusalem is he's seeing the destruction of Jerusalem, and all of that, of course, is God is everywhere. Then God is part of this doing. God is punishing us, and in that case, we are being giving bitter herbs or bitter medicine for the way we have lacked in faith and in God. So this is what comes back, sated us with bitterness, and it's a relationship of sadness or expression of sadness, which is Eicha in its core.
Fantastic. Okay, so if the normal way we find being sated is God gave us the land and then we got sated and rebelled, now we're describing the exact opposite thing. Like God took away the land and sated us with bitterness, with misery, and so we turn back to God. Okay, so that we have exact opposite going on with the normal sated root versus the sated with bitterness. Fantastic. Thank you, Benny. Sylvia and then Nikki.
Thank you. Those are, I mean, to me, a lot of this reminds me of wandering around the wilderness with the manna, and then we get tired of the manna, so we want this, and so he gives us all this quail and whatever, and he gives it to us to the point where we die from it because we eat so much, because we're sated, but we're oversated. So maybe this is like, this is what we do. You give us a penny, we want a dime. I mean, you give us a drink, we want a second drink, whatever. You know what I mean. So maybe this is what we're talking about, is that this is who we are, and we haven't learned much. We get to the destruction of the temple, and what have we learned from that wandering around in the wilderness?
Fantastic. And that, the quail story is another place we get this sated word. And that we've got two interpretations where it's one, this is our fundamental character, and two, this idea of being sated is part of what we do, but as Benny said, it's working in the opposite way that it normally does. Okay, Nikki, and then we're going to keep moving.
I think that verses 13 to 18 are total abjection, AB, not OB, abjection, and it's possibly also, okay, so I turn to God and he's not available anymore. He's not only not available, but this is what happens when I turned. Now, finally, here I am turning to God, and look what happens. All these terrible, terrible responses to my destruction and the destruction of my, what are they called? Progeny, generations after me.
Yeah, we have a couple of verses before this. I didn't give it to you. Even when I cry out and I cry for help, he stops up my prayer.
That's what I wanted to say. This is a God who doesn't respond, or who responds so negatively that the world has come to an end.
I mean, horrible, but yes. Okay, we're going to look quick at bitterness. Bitterness appears a lot in the Tanakh with mar. The full root is mim resh resh. It doesn't appear very often with mim resh resh with a full root. The places it does appear with a full root, mim resh resh, are here in our verse, and then also the twice we talk about bitter herbs in connection to Passover. One of those is in Exodus 12, talking about how you do the Passover sacrifice. We read, and they shall eat the meat on that night, roasted with fire, with matzah and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Okay, so the verse in Lamentation is to be satiated with bitterness, satiated with b'morim. Here we're talking about al-morim, the same bitterness word. When we're talking about in context of Passover sacrifice, it's the bitter herbs. When we're talking about it in our Lamentations verse, it's some sort of bitterness, perhaps the bitter herbs, I don't know. We're going to move now to the petichta, the bit from Lamentations Raba. which is going to try and make sense of this for us. All right. So, Lamentations Raba Petichta 18. Rabbi Avin Petach. Rabbi Avin started, opened. Hispiani b'melolim. He has sated me with bitterness. Okay, what does that mean? When did that happen? We're talking about B'leilei HaPesach Shel Yom Tov HaRishon. This happened on the first night of Passover. And Hirvani La'ana, he has intoxicated me with wormwood. This happened on Tisha B'Av. Mema shehishbi'ani b'layla Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Pesach, Hirvani b'leila Tisha B'Av La'ana. Heva b'leila Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Pesach hu leila Tisha B'Av. From the fact that he sated me on the first night of Passover, I learned likewise he intoxicated me with wormwood on the night of Tisha B'Av. Therefore, the first night of Passover every year is on the same day of the week as the Erev of Tisha B'Av. All right, so we are up to our elbows in bizarre midrashic reasoning. It's on first glance, you look at it and you're like, hello, Rabbi Avin, like, can I introduce you to Sudoku? Like, do you need some other form of amusement? Because this doesn't make any sense. Let's break it down a little bit. We're making a comparison between Tisha B'Av and Passover. Can you break it down for me? And from we are doing that on the basis that every year, and this is true, Tisha B'Av and Passover happen on the same day of the week. What's going on in this Sudoku Rabbi Avin brain? What's he thinking? How is he making sense of this? Why bring Passover into this at all? How does he make sense of this? Or how do we make sense of his Sudoku brain? Stuart.
It occurs to me that this is like an unraveling of redemption, whereas, God was leading us, out of exile in Egypt and into the promised land. Now there's a complete role reversal going on here, and God is leading us out from the land of Israel into Babylon.
Oh, cool. Okay, so like doubling down on what Benny said earlier, that there's a very like horrible parallel between the exodus from Egypt and the exile from Israel. That we're talking mass movement of the Israelite or the Judean nation in both cases. We're talking about action by God. We're talking about you'd be like miracle action by God, really. We're talking about the use of other nations. And yet, leaving Egypt was obviously a good thing. Leaving Israel was obviously a bad thing. Okay, awesome. All right, keep pushing it. What else? What do you do with that? What does that have to do with what Rabbi Avin is saying? Other ways you make sense of what Rabbi Avin is saying? What's going on here? Yeah, Benny.
And maybe he's saying that there is a choice. The choice is, if we are believing in God and following God and have faith in God, it will be like the Exodus. It will be the liberation. But if we choose to reject God and do evil, or in this case, it was, I think, idolatry that caused the first temple, then our Exodus is going to go into captivity. So we should be reminded of that there is an antidote. Because in this situation of Eicha, then it's disaster lurking and disaster is feeling, but that's not the end of it. Pesach, the bitterness of Eicha can be felt in the bitterness of Pesach, but it is kind of a reversal, because there is a liberation there, but it's up to us then to make the choice if we believe God and follow Torah, or if we don't. So here we have the repercussions of our choices. One choice was to follow Moses out of Egypt. We came to liberation, and in that was a happy moment, and people was probably believing in God and later received the Torah. Here comes Tisha B'Av and says, well, now you have deserted me. And so there is, God is kind of giving us the answer to our behaviors.
Awesome. Okay. So the same thing happens both times. One, we get sated with wormwood, or sated with bitterness. The other one, we get intoxicated with wormwood. They're parallel. They're basically synonymous. And yet one, Rabbi Avin is reading as liberation and the other as destruction. And so Benny's saying, what is the difference? Why is one Pesach? Why is one the moment where God is choosing us, the moment where we're free, this is the high point of Jewish history in the calendar, right? This is the good stuff. Why do we use the same phrase to describe Passover as we do Tisha B'Av, which is the low point? Pesach, high point, sated with bitterness. Tisha B'Av, low point. He intoxicated me with wormwood. Benny's saying, well, because God does the same thing and it's a matter of perspective. Okay. Totally works. Not the only possible interpretation. But this is, Benny, that was awesome. Thank you. Other thoughts, other ways of making sense of it. Why, how on earth are we equating Passover with Tisha B'Av? How are we equating high point and low point? How are we making sense of this? Like, he sated me with bitterness as a good thing. Yeah, Sylvia, and no wrong answers here, y'all. We are making sense of like a text that's about 1800 years, 1700 years old. Like, we're doing our best here, but I don't have deep insights into Rabbi Avin's Sudoku brain beyond the ability to read Midrash. Sylvia, Luz, Stewart.
Good that there's no right answers. I'm thinking that we bring in Pesach because you're saying high point because we're about to leave, except that you don't leave until you hit the low point. And at the low point, we were sated with bitterness and we had to just, pull ourselves up and get the hell out of here. You know what I mean? So it actually makes sense to me.
Okay. So great. I'm going to put a couple words in your mouth. I'm going to satiate you with bitterness, as it were. So that what Pesach is it's redemption, but it's redemption after some hundreds of years of slavery. Like, it's redemption after the worst of the worst. It's redemption after we've cried out for God because of the worst of the worst. And in fact, the bitterness we're talking about, the reason we eat maror is to remember the bitterness of being slaves, right? Like, the connection between Pesach and Tisha B'Av then is both of these are recalling horrible moments. It's just that Pesach then we get redeemed, and Tisha B'Av we haven't gotten redeemed yet. Okay, really cool, Sylvia. Luz, and then Stewart.
So the high point and the low point, he's there. He hasn't abandoned us. So whatever celebration or non-celebration, God is still there. And somebody mentioned about the manna. Remember, he only gave us enough before it turned into mush, right? You're not supposed to get a lot. I think the same thing with bitterness. You think you can't take anymore, but he knows that what you can take and not take.
Oh, fantastic. Back to this idea of being sated. Like, we were redeemed in on Pesach because we had been satiated. We had been satiated with bitterness. And perhaps on Tisha B'Av, we're now saying, okay, let this be the moment where I become satiated. Let this have been enough so that I can get to a point of redemption. Cool. Okay. Stuart.
Well, I'm trying to find a common thread here, and maybe one common thread is that God is accompanying us on the journey either way. God accompanied us, out of Egypt, with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And again, according to Ezekiel, according to Midrash, God accompanied us into exile in Babylon. The Shekinah left the temple before it was destroyed, and God prophesied to Ezekiel in Babylon. So either way, positively or negatively, God is always our consort.
Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. So we find that in a little bit in Isaiah and Ezekiel, and we find it really in Midrash about God coming with us into exile, and that this parallel, the beautiful parallel that you set up, Benny, about the similarity between leaving Egypt and leaving Israel, that we're doing the same thing with different valences. Leaving Egypt good, leaving Israel bad. But either way, so long as we've got God with us, we'll be okay. Okay. Really cool. The fact that Tisha B'Av and Passover are on the same day of the week, does that matter? I mean, kind of cool, like fun trivia fact. Does it matter? Is there something about them falling on the same day of the week? And it's not always like this year would be a different day than last year, but does it matter that they fall on the same day of the week? Does that mean anything?
Do you mean the same day or the same date?
Same day.
Is it the Hebrew calendar?
Yeah.
Okay, so the day of the week is the same always?
Yeah. So it's like this year they would have both I'm so bad with days, but they would have both fallen on like a Tuesday or something. This literally just happened. I should know when Tisha B'Av was. Wednesday.
Right, Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Benny.
I think it's really cool. I mean, it's in a way, because it's a kickoff of the next 49 days before Rosh Hashanah. So we have this cycle that, in a yearly cycle, we are always reminded ourselves about the calamities of our people as well as the liberation of our people. And we have the time, we can keep track on where we are in time with this mirroring.
You're fair. Okay.
And yeah.
Yeah, Rosalie?
Just quickly, maybe it's that old expression that we keep using as to never forget. And so just another reminder of what we've been through.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that works for both holidays, right? That
Yeah.
Even on Pesach, you're on your way to Tisha B'Av. Even on the holiday of freedom and liberation and chosenness, you're on your way to destruction. And likewise, on Tisha B'Av, you're on your way back to Pesach. That we have this cyclical Jewish time. Cool. Okay. We're gonna dive down Benny's rabbit hole about the 49 days. Yeah.
Can I just add something? Because I think the neat part, you have Pesach, we come to the Mount Sinai after 49 days, and then God gives us, we don't coronate God there, but God gives us something in the Torah. And here, the 49 days from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah, we coronate God as a king. So, I mean, there is that relationship is really interesting. And it just hit me since you wrote it there.
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. And let's talk about that. So I've taught this Midrash a lot. I most recently taught this Midrash to a bunch of rabbinical students. And one of my rabbinical students who has now become a rabbi wrote this absolutely beautiful summary of what Benny just said. She wrote, from Pesach to Shavuot, we count 49 days from liberation to revelation. From Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah, we count 49 days from destruction to rebirth. So that there's this really interesting parallel where after Passover happens, we're counting the Omer towards Shavuot, towards the giving of the Torah, towards the acceptance of the yoke of Torah, as they say. Tisha B'Av, we are crushed, we are destroyed, we are nothingness, and we're counting 49 days towards Rosh Hashanah, where we accept God as king, right? That's all this kingship language that we'll be chanting for hours and hours and hours in a little less than 49 days from now. Do other people have, oh, no, I'm gonna read you Lamentations Raba 3:17 because it's relevant. And then afterwards, we're gonna think about this Pesach to Shavuot to Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah cycle. Okay, so Lamentations Raba 3:17 is commenting on this horrible verse in Lamentations 3. The verse is, you have covered yourself in anger. You have and pursued us. You have killed and showed no pity. Rabbi Chalbo asked Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. He said to him, I've heard that you are a master of stories. So what is the meaning of the verse that I just read? You have covered yourself with prayer so that prayer could not pass through. And that's Nikki, you were referring to that verse earlier. And Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman replies, prayer can be compared to a mikvah and repentance to a sea. Just as a mikvah is sometimes open and sometimes locked, so too the gates of prayer are sometimes locked and sometimes open. But the sea is always open. Thus too are the gates of repentance always open. Okay, I'm not going to say anything about that yet. I just want you guys to have that while we're thinking about, I want your thoughts on Pesach to Shavuot to Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. Sylvia, Yoda, yeah.
It's kind of still the same. It reminds me so much of something that Alan Liu said, which was that we tend to think that we start preparing for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at Tisha B'Av. But should we really be preparing for it earlier? And he goes back to Pesach. He goes back to the cycle. In fact, it is all a cycle. We go around the circle, we go away from God, and then we come back to God. And it goes on and on and on. So this is exactly what this reminds me of.
Fantastic. Yeah, completely. Okay. Benny.
I'm thinking of the Omer count. That's a way of refining ourselves. It's a way of cleaning or cleansing ourselves, so we are ready from to the revelation. Each week has its own midot from the 7 emotional midot from Kabbalah there to become a culmination when it comes to Shavuot. And here I don't know, we have 49 cleansing steps in we have the 7 weeks of the Haftarot, but we have Psalm 27, we start the first of Elul at least to kind of start to prepare ourselves. So it has similarities, these two portions of 49 days, which is very, very exciting actually.
Yeah, fantastic. And one of the interesting things about counting the Omer and doing the Kabbalistic version where you are doing the midot, Malchut Sheba Malchut, all of that fun stuff, is the midot that you're doing are like, you're looking for the midot in you that reflect God's midot, right? And it's this becoming closer to God until you meet God at Mount Sinai. Now, the idea of creating some sort of similar ritual for the time between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, between destruction and crowning God as king, you're like, okay, well, we've been reaching out for God and God hasn't answered. Can I then say, I'm looking for God in me? Can I read God's qualities in me that exist in God? Or is that somehow inappropriate after Tisha B'Av? It's really interesting question. Yafeh. Okay. That's down a deep rabbit hole, though, that we don't need to go down. Stuart.
Oh, real quick, isn't there a Midrash that the Moshiach, the Messiah, will be born on Tisha B'Av? So maybe the lesson is that, there are the seeds of redemption in every catastrophe.
Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So one thing to do as well with this is say, okay, Tisha, how do we get from Pesach to Shavuot to Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah? Because push comes to shove, like B'ezrat Hashem, Kshe HaMashiach Yavo, with God's help, when the Mashiach comes, these are all Moadim. These are all times of closeness to God. These are all times of us being in intense relationship with God. And that on Tisha B'Av in the future, it will be the holiday of holidays. It will be so celebrated, which is a crazy thought given where we are right now and what's happened in the past week. But when we're allowing ourselves to imagine these messianic times, it becomes a possibility. Really quick, Ellie, and then I'm going to close.
Thank you. I was just thinking that maybe that for Passover, we are very happy that we are in connection with God and we leave slavery into the promised land. And we're so happy and praising God. Whereas to Shabbat, we are more like sad and somber, and that means that when we're happy we praise, and when we are angry we put him down and claim and push him back. Well, you are doing this to me. But we go when we pray and we're happy, we pray, oh, thank you. But when we don't get what we got, or we lost something, we get angry. That's about all.
Really cool. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so what I'm going to leave you guys with is just that very last bit of Midrash I read to you, the contrast between prayer and repentance. And that we've got 49 days now, or a little bit less, but we've got about 49 days where we're stepping our way towards Rosh Hashanah from Tisha B'Av. And that on Tisha B'Av, prayer didn't work. We cry out and God doesn't answer us. And by the time we get to Rosh Hashanah, we're going to spend, if you're in Pool, you're going to spend a bunch of days crying out to God. And God, the expectation is that God hears, that God answers, right? Anenu, God answers us. But in between, in these 49 days, before the gates of prayer are opened, the gates of repentance perhaps are opened. And that allows us to say, okay, if God's not going to listen to me, I'm going to reach out to my fellow human. I'm going to do ben adam l'chavaro. I'm going to repair my relationship with my brother, my sister, my friend, or my whomever. And by doing that, I can start walking these 49 days towards the opening of the gates of prayer. I can start, as Benny said in the beginning, making the choice to read the bitterness as absinthe, as a nice drink to have while out with a buddy apologizing to them. Cool. All right. thank you all so much for learning with me. I'm going to put my email in the chat just one more time in case you don't have it and you want to sign up to learn more with me. And Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, and thank you all for coming. And I put the website for the Jewish Collaborative in the chat in case you want to come to our next series, which will be taught by Hazan Marcia Lane, which will be very exciting as well. And thank you so much, Bex, for this exciting, wonderful series of classes. We look forward to seeing you back sometime soon. And last thing is, if don't let money get in your way, but if you have the notion that you would like to help support people like Bex Rosenblatt and Marcia Lane, please, you're welcome to make a donation to the Jewish Collaborative. We'd love to have you. So thanks. Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Great class.
Thank you.